Hey guys, today we step into a chamber of shadows, where silence is louder than words. Imagine your footsteps echoing through a corridor of cold marble, the light of a single candle, trembling as if nervous about what's about to be spoken. Somewhere beyond these walls, church bells toll faintly, each strike reverberating like a warning. Tonight I want you to listen closely, not as a passive viewer of history, but as a fellow traveller who dares to hear what was never meant to survive. What if the story you've been told all your life, one repeated for nearly 2,000 years, was not the whole truth? What if, hidden beneath centuries of doctrine, silence and smoke lingers a secret so dangerous it could topple thrones, shatter faith, and undo the power of an empire? The question is simple, yet it echoes like thunder. What if Jesus of Nazareth had daughters? You probably wouldn't survive this truth in the ancient world. Entire kingdoms would burn to erase it. Bishops would call for fire, kings would call for blood, and inquisitors would sharpen their knives. Because a daughter of Christa, living heir, would challenge everything. Her blood alone would be a gospel more powerful than any sermon, her existence a threat greater than any heresy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The whispers begin not in fire but in silence. Think of how history is usually erased, not by destroying every word but by omitting just enough that memory dissolves, a missing name in a scroll, a story the bishops decide not to copy again, a tale told once at a village fire, never written, then gone. Erasure often feels like forgetting, but it is something more deliberate. History is not neutral, it is carved by power. Imagine the early church as it gathered strength in the centuries after Christ's death. Small groups of believers scattered across the Mediterranean, some seeing him as a purely divine figure, others emphasizing his humanity. Among these voices, some whispered that he had a partner, a wife, perhaps children, perhaps daughters. But silence is the most effective tool. To admit such a thing would have been catastrophic. Authority depended on a single narrative that salvation flowed only through priests, bishops, and eventually popes. A bloodline would ruin it. Imagine a woman stepping into the public square, her very body a contradiction to Rome's authority. I am his descendant. No pope could rival her claim. No council could overrule her blood. And so, if these daughters ever lived, they had to vanish. Not through sword alone, but through omission. Remove their names from the record. Cast doubt on their possibility. Tell the world that Magdalene was not wife but whore. Tell them she was penitent, broken, a sinner saved, rather than a mother carrying forward his life. Build sermons on this image until generations could not imagine her otherwise. In time, the idea of daughters would sound absurd, but memory never dies completely. Somewhere in the cracks of forgotten texts, in the margins of apocryphal gospels, in the folds of frescoes and sculptures, small echoes remain. Like a faint shell left behind by the tide, or a rose pressed between the pages of a book, clues linger. Pause for a moment. Picture yourself walking through a medieval church. The air smells of stone dust and melted wax. You see a Madonna painted on the wall, but her robe carries an odd symbol, a rose, a chalice, something you don't remember from catechism class. To the ordinary eye, it's decoration. To the initiated, it is a whisper, a reminder of a story never spoken aloud. And so we begin this journey. Tonight, we will not take the well-lit path of orthodox history. We will wander instead into the shadowed corridors, where history bends into myth, and silence is more revealing than words. We will follow the whispers that speak of a bloodline not of kings or prophets alone, but of daughters. Hidden children whose existence would have threatened to unseat popes and emperors. Why daughters? Because in the ancient world a daughter was at once invisible and unstoppable. She could be erased from genealogies, absent from chronicles. Yet through her, the line would continue. A hidden thread weaving through time, slipping past the watchful eyes of Rome. And perhaps that is why the whispers persisted. Perhaps that is why, even now, when we walk past forgotten chapels, or read a half-burnt manuscript, or see the strange darkness of a Madonna's face, We feel that something is being remembered against the odds, so let's follow it together. Step by step, question by question, into the silence where memory still lingers. Step with me into a hall lit by oil lamps, the air thick with incense and human breath. The year is 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea. Bishops in white robes shuffle across marble floors, parchment rustling in their hands. The flickering light makes their shadows long and uneven, like giants crouched over a fragile truth. Outside, soldiers stand guard, their armor clinking softly, keeping the restless crowd at bay. Inside, decisions are being made, not only about doctrine, but about memory itself. What happens here will decide what survives and what vanishes. Imagine being a young scribe in the corner, ink-stained fingers trembling as you copy down decrees. You smell the sour wine on Bishop's breath, hear arguments rising like thunder, and then a silence heavy with finality. Lines are drawn, some texts included, others condemned. The Gospels of Philip, of Mary, of Thomas too strange, too intimate, too dangerous. They are whispered about, but not copied again. And in an age when every book was written by hand, not copied meant not remembered. The Church understood something most of us forget. Silence is stronger than denial. To destroy is noisy, to omit is quiet, efficient, absolute. Burn a book and people may remember what was lost. Refuse to copy it, and within a generation it ceases to exist. So when we ask why there is no record of Christ's family, perhaps the answer is simpler than we think. It was never written, or it was written, and then deliberately not written again. A small decision at a wooden table in a smoke-filled room, and an entire bloodline disappears from history. Picture the bishops debating. Should Christ be remembered as purely divine, untouched by flesh, above hunger, desire, and family? Or should he be remembered as both divine and human, capable of love, perhaps even of children? The choice was not theological alone, it was political. A divine Christ could be managed through sacraments and priests. A human Christ with heirs could not. His daughters, if they lived, would stand outside the Church's control, and so silence prevailed. Magdalene's role was diminished, her closeness was dismissed. The possibility of children was arrayed not through war, but through omission. Pause for a moment and think of silence in your own life. How often does silence carry more weight than words? When someone omits your name from a list, when your story is not told, the absence itself becomes its own kind of violence. Now imagine that on the scale of history. Whole communities silenced, entire gospels vanished, women erased. But silence never works perfectly. Even here, in the councils of bishops, cracks appear. A letter survives, a fragment preserved in a desert cave, a memory carried by villagers who whisper the old stories at night. Silence cannot destroy completely, it only buries. Imagine yourself centuries later, walking through the ruins of a monastery. The roof long gone, rain dripping down cracked stone. You brush dust from a wall and see a faint carving, 2 roses side by side, perhaps nothing, or perhaps a memory preserved in silence, a code meant for those who still remembered that there were once daughters. The silence of the Church was not passive, it was strategic. By deciding which stories to keep, they shaped not only belief but identity. The Christ we know today is the Christ chosen by councils, edited by emperors, preserved by scribes under orders. Every inconvenient fragment was quietly buried. Think about that. The greatest power in history may not have been swords, or crowns, or armies, but silence. And the most effective way to forget is not to destroy but to omit. This is the power of silence. It shapes memory without leaving fingerprints. It allows an institution to erase a truth so thoroughly that, centuries later, even the question itself feels like blasphemy. But silence also leaves ghosts. And it is those ghosts, the whispers in Gospels half burned, the symbols carved into cathedrals, the legends of Magdalene that we're here to follow. The council fades. The bishops disperse. The lamps gutter out, leaving the chamber in darkness. But the silence remains, like a shadow that never lifts. Close your eyes and step back into the ancient Mediterranean. The air is dry, tinged with dust from stone streets, and the faint perfume of olives crushed in the press. Men's names echo loudly in scrolls and chronicles, their legacies chiselled into marble. But daughters? Their names vanish like smoke. Their births are rarely recorded, their voices absent from testimony. They exist in silence, yet through their bodies, lineage flows unbroken. Now imagine this. What if Jesus left behind sons? Sons would be hunted, their identities written, challenged, questioned, and erased violently. But daughters? They could disappear more easily, slipping into obscurity while still carrying the most dangerous inheritance of all. Invisible to history, unstoppable in reality. This is the paradox of daughters in antiquity, at once dismissed, yet essential. Marginalized in record, yet central to continuity. Think of genealogies, a scroll after scroll filled with patriarchs, names of fathers and sons. But a daughter's name, if present at all, is a brief footnote. His daughter married into such and such family. And yet, through her womb, dynasties rose and fell. Imagine a quiet wedding in a small Galilean village. No trumpets, no fanfare. A young woman walks into another family's household, her name barely written. But within her veins flows blood that could undo empires. And when she gives birth, that child inherits not only her anonymity but also her secret, a hidden thread weaving through the fabric of history. Pause. Think about the invisibility of women in your own family tree. How many of your great-great-grandmothers can you name? Chances are far fewer than the men. Now magnify that erasure across 2,000 years. It becomes clear, if Christ had daughters, their survival depended on this very invisibility. And perhaps this is why the whispers persist. Legends of daughters appear not in open chronicles, but in fragments folk tales, carvings, symbols, a rose painted in the corner of a fresco, two unnamed maidens walking beside Magdalene in a manuscript margin, details so small they slip past censors, but meaningful to those who looked closer. Why daughters? Because they were both hidden and unassailable. Rome could strip a man of his title, burn his genealogy, exile his sons, but daughters married, blended, disappeared into families. Their bloodline continued not in the spotlight but in the shadows, and sometimes shadows endure longer than monuments. Imagine for a moment standing at the edge of a medieval village festival. The smell of roasted chestnuts and smoke lingers. A troubadour strums a lute, singing of two maidens who carried a secret older than kings. People listen, smile, nod, and move on. To them it is a story, a myth. But to some, it was a memory wrapped in song, disguised as entertainment so the church could not condemn it. The daughter's power was not in politics, nor in scripture. It was in existence itself. Their blood was a living testimony that Christ's legacy continued outside Rome's walls. To admit such a truth would have been to unravel centuries of dogma. And so, the silence. Not just a forgetting, but a suppression. Remove their names, doubt their possibility, and within a few generations the world forgets. But memory is never fully lost. Here and there, a trace lingers, the rose carved into cathedral stone. The Madonna holding not only Christ but a second hidden child. The whispers of troubadours about sisters, two maidens who carried light into exile. Why daughters? Because invisibility was their strength, and invisibility is why the story may still live, just beneath the surface of history. So we return to the question, why daughters? Because they were the perfect vessel of both erasure and endurance. They could be forgotten on paper but remembered in flesh. Their silence was their protection, their invisibility, their immortality. And perhaps that is why the whispers remain quiet, unbroken, passed like a secret flame through centuries. The scene opens at dawn. You're standing with Mary Magdalene outside the tomb. The air is cold and sharp, dew clinging to the grass, each breath clouding in the early light. The world is hushed, as though holding its breath, and then the stone is rolled away. She is the first to see, the first to know. In the canonical Gospels, this moment defines her as witness, but in other forbidden texts, it defines her as something far more intimate, companion, partner, perhaps wife. The Gospel of Philip, found centuries later in the sands of Nag Hammadi, whispers of a closeness that unsettled the other disciples. The Saviour loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often. The line is fragmentary, damaged by time, but its meaning is undeniable. The other disciples were jealous. Imagine the tension, the sidelong glances, Peter's clenched jaw as Magdalene speaks with a confidence none of them share. To some, these words are metaphor kisses of knowledge, symbols of spiritual intimacy. But to others, they hint at something the Church could never accept, that Christ and Magdalene were bound in sacred union, that she was not merely a witness to his resurrection, but a vessel of his continuation. Picture Magdalene in this new light. Not the penitent prostitute the Church painted centuries later, but a woman standing in the centre of the story, her presence unshakable, a partner whose very role redefined what Christianity might have been. But power cannot tolerate rivals. In the 6th century, Pope Gregory the Great gave a single sermon that reshaped her image forever. He conflated her with another woman, a prostitute from the Gospels, and declared her a sinner redeemed by Christ's mercy. One sentence, one interpretation, and history bent to it. Magdalene's potential role as wife and mother was buried beneath shame. Now imagine the weight of that stigma. For centuries, in paintings and sermons, she appears half naked, her hair flowing, a symbol of lust and repentance. But beneath that image lingers another one too dangerous to be remembered. A Magdalene carrying not shame, but a child. Legends from southern France add fuel to this whisper. They speak of her arrival by boat, exiled from the Holy Land. In some stories she is alone, in others she carries a child, a daughter, perhaps more than one. Imagine her walking through the salt marshes of Provence, a bundle clutched to her chest, the cries of an infant muffled by the wind. The Church needed her diminished, but the people remembered otherwise. In Provence she became a saint, her relics venerated, her story honoured. In some chapels she's not portrayed as penitent, but regal, cloaked in mystery, and in hidden symbols, the black Madonnas, the carved rose Charolles as mother lingers. Consider what it would mean if Magdalene was truly Christ's wife. History would have unfolded differently. Christianity would not be a story of celibate priests and patriarchs, but of a family, a union of masculine and feminine, a lineage alive in flesh. Women would stand not as penitents, but as heirs. The silence around her is telling. When Peter challenges her authority in the Gospel of Mary, it is jealousy that speaks. Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? The text breaks off mid-scene, as though the most important part of her voice was deliberately lost. But silence itself is evidence. For why erase so fiercely if there was nothing to hide? So stand once more with Magdalene outside the tomb. The sun is rising, the air warming with light. You hear her voice calling out the news of resurrection, but behind her a deeper silence hums, a silence that suggests she carried more than words into the world, a silence that hints at a bloodline, daughters, perhaps, whose existence would have rewritten the story of Christianity. Mary Magdalene remains the axis of this story. To some, sinner, to others, saint, and to whisperswife, mother, bearer of a bloodline. Erased not by accident, but by necessity. For in her womb may have rested the most dangerous inheritance of all. Imagine for a moment that the whispers are true, that Mary Magdalene was not only Christ's companion, but his wife, the mother of his heirs. Let the weight of that settle on your shoulders. The entire architecture of Christianity begins to tilt. The Church, which built its authority on being the sole vessel of divine truth, suddenly faces a rival far greater than heresy. A living heir needs no bishop, no pope, no sacrament. Her blood itself is authority. Picture the church leaders of the early centuries. They are not naive. They understand bloodlines. In their world, kings rule by birthright. Priests trace descent to prophets, and dynasties hinge on inheritance. A daughter of Christ would not be myth. She would be fact, flesh and blood walking among them. Her presence would challenge every sermon, every crown, every throne. And so, the danger. The danger was not only in what she might say, but in what she might be. Imagine her standing in the marketplace of Jerusalem or Rome. She does not need to preach. She does not need to write. Her existence is enough. I am his daughter. That sentence alone would reduce papal decrees to dust. This is why the narrative had to change. and the change came not with evidence but with rhetoric. In 591 AD, Pope Gregory the Great delivered a sermon that would echo for centuries. In it he fused together three women from the Gospels, Mary Magdalene, Mary of Bethany, and the unnamed prostitute, and declared them one and the same. With a single stroke, Magdalene became the penitent sinner, a woman redeemed by Christ's mercy rather than empowered by his love. Picture the congregation in Rome that day. They sit shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, the air heavy with incense and sweat. They nod, murmur prayers, cross themselves. The Pope's voice rises, condemning lust, praising repentance, and with each word Magdalene's potential as wife and mother is buried deeper beneath shame. The brilliance of this move is chilling. A rival was not destroyed, she was transformed. From partner to prostitute, from equal to penitent, from mother to sinner, and the world accepted it, carried it forward, painted it into frescoes, carved it into stone, preached it from pulpits. For centuries her image was one of disgrace, and the possibility of daughters was erased not with fire but with stigma. But legends linger. In southern France they tell of her arrival not in shame, but in quiet dignity. A woman in exile, yes, but carrying with her a secret so dangerous it had to be hidden. Sometimes she's alone, sometimes she carries a child. In some stories she brings not one but two daughters, twin heirs, embodying balance, shadow and light, flesh and spirit. The danger of the union lies not only in politics but in theology. If Christ was husband and father, then he was fully human, desiring, loving, creating life. This undermines the image Rome preferred, a Christ above the body, untouched by earthly ties. To admit his humanity so deeply was to decentralize the Church's control. For if divinity lived in blood, in women, in children, then no priest could claim monopoly on salvation. Pause for a moment. Imagine history rewritten. A Christianity where Magdalene is honoured as wife and mother, where daughters are celebrated as heirs. Cathedrals might bear not only the image of Christ crucified, but of Christ united, a family at the heart of faith. Women would not be penitents, but co-bearers of divine authority. The balance between masculine and feminine would have been different. The course of history itself would have shifted. And yet that was the very reason it could not be allowed. The union was too dangerous. So Magdalene was recast. Her daughters, if they lived, were erased. And the silence that followed was enforced not only by omission but by ritual repetition. Generation after generation heard of her only as sinner, and repetition more than fire is what shapes memory. But beneath repetition, whispers endure. In art she reappears robed in red, eyes lifted not in shame but in defiance. In hidden text she is teacher, partner, beloved, and in legend she carries a child across the sea. The union was dangerous because it would have changed everything, and maybe it still does. For every time we revisit her story, every time we peel back the layers of silence, we feel the possibility stir again. What if Christ loved her? What if they built a family? What if daughters survived? The danger is not in proof. The danger is in the question itself. And so the story of Magdalene shifted, from equal to sinner, from partner to penitent. The daughters erased not by accident, but by necessity. The silence grows deeper, but silence always leaves traces. The Mediterranean is restless. Waves slap against the side of a small wooden boat, each impact hollow and fragile. There are no sails, no oars, only faith or desperation pushing it forward. Inside, cloaked figures huddle, the salt wind biting their skin, eyes wide with fear. Among them, Mary Magdalene. In some stories she's alone, in others she cradles a child, perhaps two. In either version she carries more than herself. She carries a secret that could unmake kingdoms. The journey feels endless. The skies are bruised grey, gulls circle overhead, and the boat drifts as though guided by an unseen hand. Imagine the passengers clinging to each other, whispering prayers in the rising storm. You can almost taste the salt spray, gritty on your lips, the fear in your throat. For to them Jerusalem is no longer safe. If Christ had daughters, their lives are in danger. Exile is survival. And then the shore, Provence, Salt marshes stretch wide, reeds swaying, the air heavy with brine. Villagers gather at a distance, watching the strangers stagger onto land, their robes clinging, their faces pale from hunger. A woman steps forward, carrying something close to her chest. Is it parchment, relics, a child? The legends do not agree, but they agree on this. Magdalene arrived here. Southern France still remembers. In the caves of Saint-Baume, pilgrims climb steep paths, kneeling where she is said to have prayed. Step inside and the air chills instantly. The rock walls weep with condensation, dripping into stone basins below. Pilgrims whisper prayers, light candles that gutter in the damp air. The legend says she spent her last years here, weeping, fasting, carrying a secret she could never speak. Repentance, the church says, but perhaps grief. Perhaps the burden of protecting a lineage too dangerous to reveal. Local traditions tell of more. Some say she arrived not alone but with companions. Some say she brought her daughter. Some whisper she brought two. In folk songs they are the sisters, their names lost, their story hidden in allegory. Twin roses carved into chapels, two maidens etched into stained glass. Were these coincidences or codes? And then there are the Black Madonnas, dark-skinned statues of a mother and child scattered across France, Spain and Italy. In Provence especially, they appear most often silent, watchful, magnetic. Pilgrims kneel before them, believing they represent Mary the Virgin. But others whisper, no, these are Magdalene and her child, memorialized in stone, their truth hidden in plain sight. Imagine kneeling in a shadowed chapel, candle smoke curling upward. The statue gazes down, her face dark, her child swaddled against her chest. To the faithful, a virgin. To the initiated, a mother of Christ's bloodline. Two truths, one image, the perfect disguise. Exile is never just escape. It is preservation. By leaving Jerusalem, Magdalene ensured that if there were daughters, they would not perish in the violence of the Holy Land. Instead, they would take root in Europe. Their story buried under layers of legend, their blood carried quietly through villages and noble halls alike. Pause for a moment. Imagine walking through Provence today. The air is heavy with lavender and pine, the stones warm beneath the sun. You step into a medieval church, its walls cool, its light dim. In a corner a statue stands, dark, maternal, mysterious. You feel the weight of centuries pressing down. Is this only a saint? Or is this a memory encoded in wood and paint waiting for you to recognize it? The exile to France is not a story of defeat. It is survival, and in survival there is power. Because what Rome could not destroy, it had to bury. What Magdalene carried into exile, whether relic, scroll or daughter, was too dangerous to erase completely. And so, like the tide, the memory returned again and again, in whispers, in symbols, in stories told by firelight, and that is why southern France has always felt like a cradle of secrets. Here, more than anywhere else, the whispers of Christ's hidden heirs still linger. Exile did not erase the daughters. If anything, it ensured they could not be found. Hidden in valleys, carved into symbols, woven into legend, their presence endured. The shore of France was not an end. It was a beginning. Step into a dim medieval chapel. The air is thick with candle smoke, beeswax dripping in slow rivulets down iron holders. The walls are cool stone, damp with centuries of breath and prayer. And there, at the far end, stands a figure dark, solemn, magnetic, a mother and child, a Madonna unlike the pale Renaissance paintings most of us know. Her skin is black, her gaze direct, her presence almost unsettling. She is the Black Madonna, and she is everywhere. Across France, Spain, and Italy, pilgrims still kneel before them, wooden or stone statues of a dark-skinned mother holding a child. For centuries they have been venerated for miracles, protection, fertility. But what if their meaning is older, deeper, and far more dangerous? Why are they black? Historians have offered explanations, centuries of candle smoke staining the paint, pigments reacting with humidity. But to many the colour is intentional, a symbol, a veil, a code. In Provence, where Magdalene is said to have lived her final years, Black Madonnas are found in abundance. They are said to whisper of a hidden truth, the presence of Magdalene herself, not as penitent sinner, but as mother. Imagine kneeling before one. The flicker of light dances across her face, shadowing the child in her arms. To the faithful, she is Mary the Virgin. But to those who know the Whispers, she is Magdalene carrying a bloodline. The child is not the Christ child reborn, but a daughter, his daughter swaddled in secrecy. The symbolism deepens. In ancient tradition, black is not merely colour, but mystery, fertility, earth. Goddesses of Egypt and the Middle East were often rendered dark, representing life, soil, and the womb. The Black Madonna carries echoes of this sacred feminine, a reminder of a time before patriarchal religion dominated, when divinity was mother as much as father. Now picture a medieval peasant entering such a chapel. She kneels, places her hand on the stone base, whispers a prayer for her child's health. She has no idea of theological controversy, no concern for bloodlines, and yet, by preserving her devotion, she unknowingly preserves the symbol. She becomes a participant in carrying forward a forbidden memory Magdalene as mother, Christ's lineage alive. These Madonnas endure uneasily. The Church tolerates them but rarely celebrates them. Theologians explain them away, treat them as curiosities, but still they stand, in niches, in shrines, in chapels at the edge of mountains, silent, watchful, guardians of a secret that will not die. Pause here. Imagine yourself walking through Provence. Lavender scents the air, cicadas buzz in the fields, but inside the chapel it is cool, dark, timeless. You light a candle before a Black Madonna. For a moment you feel as though she's looking back at you, not as a statue, but as a keeper of memory. And you wonder, what is she hiding in plain sight? The Black Madonnas remind us that history is not only written in texts, it is carved in wood, painted in stone, whispered in ritual. They are symbols of resistance, testaments to a story too dangerous to speak aloud, a story of daughters, of inheritance, of the sacred feminine erased but never extinguished. And so the Black Madonnas endure. To some they are miracle workers, to others relics of older goddesses, but to Whispers they are Magdalene herself, mother of daughters, standing eternal in silent defiance. Symbols of a bloodline erased from history yet carved forever in stone. Picture a medieval castle at dusk. Torches flare against high stone walls, their smoke rising into the violet sky. Inside the great hall, nobles feast wine sloshing in silver cups, roasted meat steaming on trenchers of bread, music from lutes and pipes weaving through the air. 'Tis a scene of power, of privilege, of dynasty. But behind the laughter and revelry lies something more fragile. Secrets. Now step into a smaller chamber beyond the feast. Here a scribe sits hunched over parchment, his quill scratching across the page. He is updating a family genealogy. The record of marriages and heirs. Each name matters. Each union ties land to blood, blood to legitimacy. But pause, the scribe hesitates. A name is missing, a line erased, a detail too dangerous to record. He dips his quill again, draws a flourish, and moves on. What vanishes from the parchment lives on only in whispers. This is how guardianship worked. If Magdalene carried Christ's bloodline into exile, it could not survive openly. The daughters could not proclaim themselves. But noble families, lords and ladies of southern France, Occitania, Provence-May, have woven them quietly into their lineages. Marriage was the perfect disguise. The sacred blood became hidden blood preserved in plain sight. Imagine a wedding in a stone chapel. Candles flicker against painted frescoes of saints. A nobleman takes the hand of a veiled bride. To the congregation, it is a union of wealth and alliance. To the few who know, it is something more, the merging of Christ's hidden lineage with the fabric of Europe's nobility. This possibility is why whispers circle the Merovingians, the long-haired kings of the Franks. Rising in the 5th century, they ruled with an aura of mystery. Their subjects believed they had healing powers, that their legitimacy came not from Rome but from something older. Deeper. Were they guardians of a bloodline, or heirs themselves? Rome's unease with them suggests the latter, but the Merovingians may not have been alone. In the castles of southern France, in the valleys where Cathars later flourished, dynasties guarded secrets. Their coats of arms bore roses and chalices, symbols out of place in ordinary heraldry. Troubadour songs celebrated maidens whose beauty was described not in flesh, but in hidden light. Could these be coded acknowledgements of an inheritance too sacred to name? Pause here. Picture yourself in a castle hall during a winter storm. Outside, wind howls against arrow slits. Snow piles against the walls. Inside, a fire crackles, shadows dancing across banners stitched with roses. A noble family gathers by the hearth, telling their children stories of ancestors. But one story is never told aloud, only hinted at with a glance, a symbol, a whispered song. Guardianship is silence, passed down like an heirloom, and perhaps this was the safest path. For Rome could burn villages, execute heretics, destroy sects. But a bloodline hidden in noble marriages could not be erased. It would continue quietly, generation after generation, its memory preserved in silence. Think of it this way. What greater guardians could there be than those who lived by bloodlines? Nobles understood inheritance better than anyone. To them, preserving Christ's blood through daughters would not be heresy. It would be legacy. The guardianship of Christ's daughters may not have been loud or defiant. It may have been quiet, domestic, hidden in parchment and marriage contracts. But sometimes, silence is the strongest form of resistance. The noble families of Europe may have carried a bloodline without ever naming it. And in that silence, the daughters of Christ may have survived, protected by guardians who understood that the most dangerous truths must be hidden in plain sight. Picture a royal procession winding through the forests of Gaul. The year is the 6th century, and people crowd the dirt road, craning their necks to see their king. But what they notice first is not his crown, nor his cloak, but his hair-long, flowing, uncut since childhood. For the Merovingian kings, hair was more than vanity. It was sacred, a living symbol of their divine legitimacy. Subjects believed their hair carried power. A Merovingian king could heal with a touch, command loyalty with a glance, and channel something beyond ordinary rule. To cut his hair was to strip him of authority, a symbolic dethroning. Why this strange belief? Some whisper it was more than symbolism, that their blood itself was special, sacred, untouchable, perhaps descended from a forgotten inheritance. Step into a village square, a sick child is brought before the king. He extends his hand, his long hair catching the light. The crowd holds its breath. The child stirs, whispers spread. A miracle. Was it faith? Was it politics? Or was it something in his blood? The church tolerated these kings uneasily. Unlike later dynasties, the Merovingians were not crowned by Rome's blessing. Their authority seemed to come from somewhere else, something older, deeper. Chroniclers hinted at strange origins. One legend tells of Merovech, the dynasty's founder, born after his mother encountered a mysterious creature in the sea. Historians call it myth, but others suggest allegory, a coded story pointing to a lineage too dangerous to name outright. Imagine the unease in Rome, a dynasty claiming legitimacy not from papal coronation, but from blood. Long-haired kings who ruled as if they carried within them a sacred inheritance. If Magdalen's daughters truly lived, could their descendants have been woven into this line? The question lingers like smoke after fire. But the Merovingians' independence did not last. By the 8th century their line was usurped by the Carolingians. Official histories describe them as lazy kings, rulers in name only. Yet the violence of their erasure suggests more than politics. Rome and its allies needed them gone, and so their legacy was diminished, their power clipped like their hair. Pause for a moment. Picture a Merovingian crown resting in a reliquary. It is heavy, studded with gems, but its true weight lies in what it symbolized. Authority not granted by Rome, but carried in flesh and blood. A dangerous idea. Even centuries later, whispers of the Merovingians persist. Some genealogists trace their bloodlines into later dynasties. Some conspiracies claim their heirs survive in secret. And always, the connection returns to Magdalen, to daughters hidden in France, to a bloodline that may have pulsed quietly through Europe's thrones. The Merovingians stand as Europe's first great dynasty of mystery, kings whose power came not from Rome but from blood. If that blood traced back to Magdalen, then their thrones were altars, their crowns more than metal. They were guardians of a secret inheritance. And perhaps that is why their memory still haunts us. Because in their long hair, in their aura of healing, in their uneasy relationship with Rome, we glimpse an echo of something dangerous, something the Church worked tirelessly to erase. Close your eyes and picture a knight on a quest. His armour clinks with every step, his breath fogs in the cold forest air. For months he has searched through wastelands and mountains, guided by visions and riddles. At last he kneels in a candlelit chapel before a relic, a cup of stone or gold, said to be the Holy Grail, the vessel that caught Christ's blood at the crucifixion, the cup of the Last Supper, the object of endless longing. But what if the Grail was never a cup at all? The word sangreal, written in medieval romances, has two meanings. One is Holy Grail, the other, when split differently, is sangreal royal blood. Imagine that shift, a single space between words, and the meaning changes from object to bloodline, from chalice to child. Now the legends read differently. The knights' trials, their secrecy, their devotion. What if they were not protectors of a relic, but guardians of heirs? What if the Grail was not stone, but flesh? Picture a maiden in these stories, offering the Grail to the worthy knight. She's often unnamed, her presence mysterious. What if she was not metaphor, but memory? A woman carrying the blood of Christ, her body itself the sacred vessel. Think about the healing power associated with the Grail. In every tale, to find it is to restore life, to heal the land, to mend what was broken. A cup cannot do that, but a bloodline could. A living heir could embody renewal, carrying the union of divine and human forward through generations. Now imagine you are in a medieval hall, listening to a troubadour sing of knights and quests. The fire crackles, shadows stretch along the stone walls. Most of the audience hears a tale of courage and relics, but a few, those who know, hear something else. They hear a coded story, a whispered preservation of the bloodline, allegory disguised as entertainment, keeping alive what could never be written plainly. The Grail as chalice is safe. It is an object that can be found, lost, hidden again. The Grail as bloodline is dangerous. It means salvation lives in flesh, not in relics or rituals. It places authority in people, not institutions. No pope can mediate it, no bishop can control it. And perhaps this is why the Grail legends exploded in the Middle Ages. They were not about treasure hunts. They were about memory, about keeping alive in story and song. The possibility that Christ's legacy continued in daughters, in heirs, in a lineage Rome could never acknowledge. Pause for a moment. Picture standing in Chartres Cathedral, gazing up at its stained glass rose window. Light floods in, red and blue shimmering on the floor. At the centre, a chalice-shaped pattern. Is it decoration or is it code? What if every rose, every cup in medieval art is whispering the same truth? The Grail was never a relic of stone, but a womb of flesh. The Grail remains the most enduring symbol of medieval myth. To some, it is a cup. To others, a code. But to those who follow the whispers, it is Magdalene herself, the vessel of Christ's bloodline. And if so, then every quest was not for treasure, but for guardianship. For the daughters who carried within them the most dangerous inheritance of all. Walk with me into a village of southern France in the 12th century. The houses are timber and stone, the streets narrow, the air heavy with the smell of hearth smoke and baking bread. Children sing simple hymns as they skip down alleys, their voices rising like birdsong. Here live the Cathars, a people Rome would later call heretics, but who called themselves simply the pure. Their faith is simple, austere. They reject the gold and wealth of Rome. They eat sparingly bread, herbs, and water. Their rituals take place not in soaring cathedrals, but in modest homes by candlelight. Yet their beliefs unsettle the church for reasons deeper than simplicity. They elevate women. They allow them to teach, to lead, to be equals in spirit. And they hold a reverence for Mary Magdalene, unlike anything Rome ever sanctioned. Pause for a moment. Picture a Cathar gathering. Men and women sit in a circle, the flicker of an oil lamp casting soft light on their faces. They speak of the divine not as distant king, but as a balance of spirit and matter. They honour Magdalene as a teacher, not as a sinner. And in their whispers, some say, there lingers memory of her children, her daughters, a bloodline carried into the hills of Occitania. This is why Rome feared them. The Cathars represented an older vision of Christianity, one in which the feminine was honoured, where power was not centralised in priests but dispersed among believers. And perhaps, more dangerously, they remembered too much. Their villages overlapped with the very regions where Magdalen's legends persisted. Provence, the Languedoc, the caves of Sainte-Baume. Did they know of her descendants? Did they guard a truth Rome could not allow to breathe? Now imagine the contrast. In Rome, bishops dine in marble halls, their tables heavy with meat and wine, their robes embroidered with gold thread. In the Languedoc, Cathar believers share a crust of bread, a pitcher of water, their robes of coarse wool. The difference is more than wealth, it is vision. One sees faith as empire, the other sees faith as simplicity, as memory. Rome could not tolerate it. Not because the Cathars were merely poor, but because they embodied a rival story. A story where Magdalene was not erased but remembered, where her daughters, if they lived, could be honoured as vessels of sacred continuity. Pause again. Imagine yourself as a Cathar mother. You tuck your child to bed, whispering a lullaby about light and spirit. Outside, torches glimmer on the horizon, soldiers coming. You know what they want. Not just your faith, but your memory. The secret you carry in silence. The Cathars believed in two realms, one of spirit, one of corruption. They sought to live simply, to resist the rot of wealth and power. But in that choice lay their death sentence. By elevating Magdalene, by treating women as equals, by whispering of truths Rome had silenced, they marked themselves as dangerous, and so Rome prepared to erase them. Not only their faith, but their memory. The Cathars were not merely heretics. They may have been guardians, custodians of a memory Rome could not afford to let survive, and for that their villages would burn. High in the Pyrenees, a fortress clings to a jagged peak. Its name is Montségur. To the Church, it is a nest of heretics. To the Cathars, it is a sanctuary. The year is 1244. For months, it has been under siege. Snow whirls around the battlements, food runs low, and yet inside the walls a strange calm endures. Men and women sing hymns softly in the night, their voices thin against the howling wind. Imagine standing there. The cold bites through your cloak, your stomach gnaws with hunger. Every morning you see enemy banners below, the Red Cross of Rome advancing closer. Every night you pray by candlelight in the castle chapel, the smoke clinging to the stone ceiling. You know the end is coming, and then it arrives. After months of resistance, Montségur falls. More than 200 Cathars are captured. They are offered a choice: renounce their faith, bow to Rome, accept the Church's version of truth or burn. They choose fire. Picture the scene. A great wooden pyre is built at the foot of the mountain, logs stacked high. The air smells of resin and smoke even before the torches are lit. The Cathars descend from the fortress, their hands bound but their heads high. Some sing as they walk, their voices trembling but unbroken. The flames roar. The crowd gasps as the fire consumes the bodies, the smoke rising like a black column into the sky. The screams mingle with hymns, a sound that is both horror and defiance. The ground trembles. The wind carries ash into the valleys. Rome believes it has won. The Cathars are destroyed. Their memory turned to smoke, but whispers say otherwise. On the night before the final surrender, a small band slipped through the lines, carrying something with them. Not gold, not jewels, something greater. Some say it was sacred manuscripts. Others claim it was the Grail itself. But if the Grail was not a cup, what then? Perhaps it was knowledge. Perhaps it was genealogy. Perhaps it was a living heir. Pause. Imagine the scene in darkness. A handful of figures cloaked stumbling through snow, clutching a bundle to their chest. Behind them, Montségur looms like a black silhouette against the stars. Ahead of them lies only silence, secrecy, survival. The flames of Montségur were meant to erase, but sometimes fire does not only destroy, it illuminates, and in that illumination legends are born. Even today, pilgrims climb the steep path to Montségur. The wind whips across the ruins, the stones cold beneath their hands. Some say they feel a presence there, as though the voices of the Cathars linger in the air. Others speak of whispers carried on the mountain breeze, reminders that secrets do not die in fire. Montségur is not only a ruin, it is a wound in the landscape, a scar of memory. The fire burned bodies, but it could not burn blood. And in that paradox lies the power of the story. Montségur fell, the Cathars burned. But legend insists something survived. a treasure carried into the night, a secret preserved. Perhaps not an object at all, but a bloodline, the daughters of Christ hidden once more in silence. Night cloaks the Pyrenees, the stars are cold, the snow crunches underfoot. A handful of figures slip down a hidden path from Montségur, cloaks pulled tight, breath steaming in the air. Behind them, the fortress still smoulders, its walls glowing faintly red with the last embers of destruction. In their arms they carry something wrapped in cloth, not gold, not jewels, something the chroniclers never name. What was this treasure? Rome expected to find wealth chests of silver, relics, coins, but none was recovered. Instead, legends insist that the Cathars carried away something far more dangerous. Some say it was manuscripts, gospels long thought lost, genealogies pointing to a bloodline the church denied. Others whisper it was no object at all but a living presence, a child, an heir, a daughter whose existence would undo everything. Picture them stumbling down the slope, boots sinking in snow, the bundle clutched close. They do not speak. To speak is to tempt betrayal. Every sound is risk. In the distance they hear the crackle of fire and the faint wails of those who chose the flames. Behind them 200 voices rise in smoke. Ahead of them silence, secrecy, survival. The treasure of Montségur has never been found. But perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the very absence is the point. A vacuum in history, a missing piece that whispers louder than words. Something survived. Pause here. Imagine centuries later, peasants telling stories by firelight. The treasure was hidden in the mountains. It was buried beneath a chapel. It was carried to Rennes-le-Château. The versions differ, but the insistence remains. Montségur's fire did not consume everything. Something slipped away. What if this is the pattern? Again and again, when Rome moves to erase, something escapes. Texts hidden in caves, legends buried in song, bloodlines folded into noble families. The daughters of Christ, if they lived, never proclaimed themselves openly, but they may have been carried from one generation to the next, like that bundle in the snow-hidden, fragile but enduring. Consider how the story works on us even now. We search ruins, decode symbols, chase mysteries. The treasure is not only an object, but an idea, that truth cannot be fully destroyed, that even in fire something survives. So what was the treasure of Montségur? Gold, scrolls, or something far greater, a bloodline in exile? Carried into the night while the fortress burned. The chronicles are silent, but silence, as we've seen, is often the loudest clue of all. Step into the crypt of Saint-Maximin-la-Sainte-Baume in southern France. The air is damp, heavy with centuries of incense, each breath carrying the tang of stone dust. Candles flicker against the carved walls. Look closer. Amid the vines and saints etched into the rock, a chalice appears as its curve unmistakably womb-like. 2 roses flank it, their petals curling inward, whispering of secrecy. To a pilgrim, these are decorations. To the initiated, they are memory carved in stone. This is how forbidden stories survived, not in parchment alone, too fragile, too easily burned, but in architecture, in ornament, in silent geometry. Parchment can be destroyed, stone endures. Across Europe, clues linger. In Chartres Cathedral, a rose window glows as the sun passes through, its stained glass spiralling inward like a labyrinth. To the faithful it is beauty. To those who know it is code, the rose, symbol of secrecy, hiding truth in plain sight. At Notre Dame in Paris, gargoyles leer from high towers. Among them, female figures whose identities are ambiguous, gestures suggestive of hidden roles, saints unnamed, yet watching. Imagine the masons at work. They chip away at stone, hammer echoing in the vaulted hall. Dust clouds the air, sweat drips from their brows. On the surface, they carve saints, chalices, roses. But woven into these patterns are symbols meant for eyes that know how to read them. A secret passed not through words, but through chisels. Pause for a moment. Picture yourself as a pilgrim entering such a cathedral. The vast space swallows you. Coloured light spills across the floor. You kneel in awe, perhaps not noticing the twin maidens in a stained glass panel, or the chalice entwined with roses in the margin of an arch. Yet these images are there, silent witnesses to a story Rome tried to erase. Even the Templars left their marks. In chapels they built, knights kneel before mysterious women, twin figures guard a central flame, roses etched into hidden corners, flourishes of medieval art, historians say, but perhaps signals of guardianship, a way to preserve fragments of memory for those who would see. The builders knew what words could not say. To write openly was heresy. To carve discreetly was survival. Think about that. You walk past churches every day, perhaps glancing at their stained glass, their statues, their gargoyles. What if each one is a library of whispers? What if stone is not merely decoration but testimony? Stone cannot speak, but it can whisper. And across Europe, in carvings, windows and statues, it whispers still. Roses, chalices, twin maiden symbols of daughters erased from chronicles but immortalized in architecture, silent, enduring, waiting for eyes willing to see. The year is 1119. In Jerusalem 9 knights kneel in prayer. Their vow is simple, to protect pilgrims travelling the perilous road to the Holy Land. But their base is anything but ordinary. They are lodged in the ruins of the Temple of Solomon itself, on the very mount where legends say God once dwelled among men. At first, their order seems humble. A handful of men, poor, unshaven, sharing horses 2 by 2. Yet soon, rumours spread. Beneath the temple, they dig. Days turn into months, months into years. No one knows exactly what they sought or what they found. Imagine the sound of pickaxes echoing in dark tunnels, the smell of damp stone and dust filling lungs. Picture torches flickering as shadows dance on carved walls buried for centuries. Chronicles hint that they discovered not treasure of gold, but something older, stranger, documents, relics, perhaps proof of a bloodline. Because within a generation the Templars transform. They rise from poverty to immense wealth and influence. They build castles across Europe, command estates, manage vast resources. Kings borrow money from them. Popes bless them. And yet behind this rapid ascent lingers a question. Where did their power come from? Their symbols only deepen the mystery. Their seal shows 2 knights riding a single horse, interpreted by some as a sign of poverty, but by others as a symbol of duality, perhaps even of twin heirs. Their red cross, stark against white robes, suggests more than crusade. It hints at blood and purity, union and sacrifice. Pause for a moment. Imagine yourself walking into a Templar chapel. The air is cool, the stone walls bare yet etched with faint symbols. A knight kneels before an altar, but instead of a crucifix there is a carving of a woman holding a chalice. Who is she? A saint? Or Magdalene herself, disguised yet present? The Templars' rapid rise unsettled many, too wealthy, too independent, too secretive, and perhaps too knowledgeable. Did they unearth records of Christ's bloodline beneath Solomon's temple? Did they discover genealogies that proved Magdalene carried daughters into exile? If so, they became more than warriors. They became custodians of a forbidden legacy, and guardianship comes at a price. By the 14th century, kings of Europe, especially Philip IV of France, saw the Templars not as protectors but as threats. Accusations followed: heresy, blasphemy, worship of strange idols. But beneath the charges, one wonders, were they truly condemned for what they believed, or for what they knew? Pause again. Imagine the night before their arrest in 1307. Across France, knights sit at long tables, breaking bread, unaware or perhaps aware that soldiers gather outside. Somewhere in secrecy, a group of them load carts, carrying away objects never recovered. Gold? Perhaps, but maybe not. Maybe what they carried was knowledge. Maybe what they carried was blood. The Templars are remembered as warriors, bankers, martyrs, but perhaps their true identity was something more dangerous. Guardians not of gold or relics, but of daughters. Custodians of a lineage the Church could never allow. Their silence was not ignorance, it was a shield. The date is Friday, October 13th, 1307. Dawn has barely broken when soldiers fan out across France. In towns and villages, in castles and chapels, the king's men pound on heavy wooden doors. Knights of the Temple, once feared and revered, are dragged from their beds, shackled, bewildered. Across the realm, hundreds are seized in a single coordinated strike. Imagine the shock. For 2 centuries, the Templars have been guardians of Christendom, protectors of pilgrims, defenders of the Holy Land. They have fought in battles, bled in deserts, and stood as symbols of piety and strength. Now they are accused of spitting on the cross, of worshipping idols, of heresy. The charges are grotesque, unbelievable. Yet in the silence of dungeons, under the weight of chains and the agony of torture, confessions are extracted. Picture a knight in a stone cell, wrists raw from iron, smoke from a torch stinging his eyes. The inquisitor leans close, demanding a confession. Words tumble out, half delirium, half despair. And with every broken body, the order's reputation is shattered. Why such ferocity? Why such speed? Some historians point to greed King Philip IV of France was deeply in debt to the Templars, and seizing their wealth was convenient, but whispers suggest more. That beneath the official charges, the true fear was what the Templars knew. If they had uncovered records beneath Solomon's temple proof of a bloodline, genealogies tracing back to Magdalene and her daughters, then they were more than warriors. They were custodians of a truth Rome could not allow. To leave them alive was to risk revelation. To destroy them was to preserve silence. Pause here. Imagine the final moments of Jacques de Molay, the Templars' last Grand Master. It is 1314, and he is led to the stake on an island in the Seine. The crowd gathers, torches in hand, the smell of pitch heavy in the air. Bound to the pyre, he raises his voice, not in shame but in defiance. He proclaims the order's innocence, calls down judgment on Pope and King alike. Flames consume him, smoke rises against the Parisian sky. Within a year, both King and Pope are dead. To some, coincidence. To others, proof that the Templars carried more than mortal knowledge. The betrayal of the Templars is remembered as politics, kings versus knights, debt and power. But in the shadows, a deeper betrayal lingers. Perhaps it was not greed alone, but fear. Fear of a bloodline still alive. Fear of a truth too dangerous to reach daylight. The Templars fell, but whispers insist their secret did not. Some escaped. Some carried treasures never found. Was it gold? Relics? Or was it something more? Knowledge, genealogies, perhaps even a living heir? If so, then the betrayal was incomplete. The order was broken, but the lineage they guarded may have slipped once more into silence, waiting for the world to be ready. Beneath the streets of Rome, deep below the marble halls of St. Peter's, lies a labyrinth of vaults and chambers. Shelves stretch into darkness, lined with manuscripts, codices, and scrolls bound in cracked leather. Dust lingers in the air, disturbed only by the flicker of a lantern. Here, the Vatican secret archives guard memory itself. And perhaps also guard silence. Imagine walking down those corridors. The smell is thick old parchment, ink, the faint trace of wax seals melted centuries ago. A guard's footsteps echo behind you. Each locked cabinet holds voices no one outside the church has heard in hundreds of years. What is hidden here? Which stories were preserved not to enlighten but to conceal? The church has always curated memory with precision. Some texts were canonized, enshrined as scripture. Others were branded heretical, locked away. The Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, the Pistis Sophia. Each offers a voice Rome could not permit. Magdalene as teacher, as companion, as beloved. To admit her as such would open the door to a question Rome could never allow. Did she bear his heirs? Better then to silence her. Better to recast her as penitent sinner. Better to preserve her only as forgiven, never as mother. Better to omit daughters entirely. Pause here. Imagine a scholar centuries ago bent over a manuscript in candlelight. He copies carefully, but when he reaches a line about Magdalene's closeness, he hesitates. He scratches his quill across the parchment, erasing. The silence is not ignorance, it is deliberate. The archives are not neutral, they are curated absence. But silence itself whispers. For every document sealed, a rumour lingers. For every decree of suppression, a legend survives in villages, in songs, in carvings. If Christ left heirs, if Magdalene carried daughters into exile, then somewhere in these vaults might lie a trace, a genealogy, a letter, a testimony written before silence descended. Why not reveal it? Because to acknowledge it would be to unravel centuries of theology. A Christ with heirs means salvation is not mediated by sacraments or priests, but carried in flesh. It means the Church is not sole guardian of grace, but rival to a living lineage. Think about that. Imagine a woman in the 4th century stepping into a basilica, her bloodline unspoken, yet undeniable. No sermon could match her presence. No pope could eclipse her claim. Her body would be her gospel, her silence a threat. The Vatican chose silence not because there was nothing to hide, but because there was something too dangerous to admit. Silence protects. Silence maintains control, but silence also betrays itself. Even now, whispers persist of sealed documents, letters describing Christ's companions, genealogies linking noble families to Gaul, reports of sects like the Cathars who spoke too freely. Are these fantasies, or echoes of papers still locked away, guarded because they reveal too much? Pause again. Imagine yourself standing before a massive iron door deep in the Vatican vaults. Your hand rests on the cold metal. Behind it lies a truth no one is permitted to see. The silence hums louder than any sermon. The Vatican's silence endures, but silence is never perfect. It leaves traces, it invites suspicion, it draws us toward what was buried. Perhaps the most powerful evidence of Christ's hidden heirs is not in what Rome says, but in what Rome refuses to say. The silence of omission was powerful, but sometimes silence was not enough. And so, Rome turned to fire. The Inquisition was born in the 12th century, sharpened in the centuries that followed, its task simple: to hunt heresy, to crush dissent, to erase any story that threatened the Church's monopoly on truth. Imagine a village square at dusk. Torches flare. Soldiers drag a woman from her home, her face streaked with tears, her hands bound. She had spoken of Magdalene too freely, perhaps recited lines from an apocryphal text, perhaps whispered of daughters in exile. To the inquisitors, that alone was enough. She is pressed under torture until confession is wrung from her, and then flames. Picture the libraries, whole rooms of manuscripts dragged into the open, pages curling as fire devours them, the air thick with the acrid stench of burning parchment, ink bubbling and running black. Genealogies that may have linked noble families to Magdalene's line gone, scrolls describing sects like the Cathars gone. Every word that suggested Christ's humanity, his family, his heirs turned to ash. Pause here. Smell it. Not just fire, but destruction of memory. The ashes drift on the wind, carried into fields, into rivers. They fall like black snow, erasing centuries of whispers. The Inquisition's fury was not random. Families in southern France, regions where Magdalene's legends lingered, were often suspect. A symbol in a margin, a song sung in the wrong tone, a coat of arms with roses and chalices, these could mark you for interrogation. Rome was not only fighting heresy, it was guarding against memory, against the possibility that Christ's bloodline still pulsed in living veins. Think of the cruelty of it. A child's lullaby could become evidence. A family's genealogy could be a death sentence. In the dungeons, the inquisitors asked not about theology alone, but about lineage. Did you know of families who claimed unusual descent? Did you hear whispers of heirs? The answers, no matter how faint, were swallowed by fire. And yet fire never works perfectly. For every manuscript burned, one fragment survived in a hidden chest, in a remote monastery, in a cave sealed with stone. For every family erased, one child slipped away into the night. The harder Rome tried to destroy, the more stubbornly memory clung to life. Pause again. Imagine standing at the edge of a burning square, watching the flames consume not just bodies, but books. The smell is unbearable. Flesh, parchment, ink, leather. The crackle drowns out screams, and yet, in the silence afterward, you feel it. Not everything is gone. Whispers remain, always. The paradox of the Inquisition is this: the more fiercely it burned, the more clearly it revealed what it feared. Why so much fire for a faith supposedly secure? Why so much destruction if there was nothing to hide? The flames are evidence in themselves. The Inquisition left villages razed, names forgotten, voices silenced. But it could not burn blood, and so, in the very act of destruction, it testifies to its fear. Perhaps the hidden daughters of Christ did not vanish. Perhaps they survived in silence, in exile, and shadows, for ashes though cold still whisper when stirred by the wind. Step into a medieval castle chamber. A fire glows low in the hearth, the scent of smoke mingling with damp stone. On the table lies a long scroll, unrolled across the wood. Ink traces lineages, fathers, sons, marriages, alliances. This is power on parchment, inheritance made visible, but look closely. There are gaps, names smudged, origins vague, roses sketched in margins, a chalice inked in the corner. To most, decoration, to some, code. In the Middle Ages, genealogy was destiny. Kings justified their rule through bloodlines, nobles claimed land through descent. Scribes laboured to preserve every branch, and yet in southern France especially some genealogies feel deliberately obscured, a mother unnamed, a daughter omitted, a union recorded only with symbols. Was this simple forgetfulness, or silence hiding a dangerous truth? Pause here. Imagine the scribe dipping his quill, eyes darting to the door as he omits a name. To write it openly would risk accusation, perhaps the Inquisition's fire. Better to veil it in allegory, a rose instead of a name, a chalice instead of a child. The initiated would understand, the rest would see only ornament. Marriage was the perfect disguise. If Magdalen's daughters lived, they could be wed into noble families. Their bloodline would merge with dynasties, hidden in plain sight. Within a few generations, their descendants might sit at high tables, unaware of the weight they carried. The church could burn books, but it could not annul a marriage. Blood is stubborn. Think of troubadour poetry, popular in these very regions. Courtly songs describe maidens as roses blooming in secrecy, as hidden lights guiding knights. Was this merely romance, or was it veiled testimony of women whose worth lay not only in beauty, but in inheritance too sacred to speak aloud? Pause again. Picture yourself holding one of these scrolls. The parchment is rough under your fingers, the ink faded. A branch of the family tree ends abruptly. Where should be a name, there is only a rose. You wonder, was this a missing daughter? Was this where the bloodline slipped into silence? And consider heraldry. Coats of arms in certain families bear roses entwined with chalices, stars paired with crescents, symbols unusual for Christian nobility. To the unknowing, curious design. To the knowing, whispers of lineage. The church could silence voices, but families controlled memory. Around hearths, in private chambers, stories could be spoken even when not written. A mother might tell her daughter, "Your blood carries something older." The words never reach parchment, but they survive, passed hand to hand, generation to generation. So when we look at Europe's noble genealogies and find gaps, perhaps we should not see forgetfulness. Perhaps we should see silence. Erasure not of absence, but of presence too dangerous to record. The daughters of Christ may not be missing. They may be hidden disguised in roses, chalices, and gaps that whisper louder than names. High in the hills of southern France lies a small village, quiet and unassuming. Its name is Rennes-le-Château. Narrow streets wind between stone houses, the air scented with pine and wild thyme. At first glance it is like any other village, but beneath its soil, beneath its church, whispers stir. For here, in the late 19th century, a parish priest stumbled upon something that changed his life, and perhaps revived one of history's most dangerous secrets. His name was Béranger Saunière. By all accounts, he was ordinary. But one day, during renovations of his small parish church dedicated to Mary Magdalene, he found something. No one knows exactly what. Some say hidden parchments, tucked inside a hollow pillar. Others claim it was treasure. But whatever it was, within months Saunière's fortunes changed. Picture the scene. The old priest, once poor, suddenly wealthy. He renovates his church extravagantly, filling it with strange symbols. He builds a tower, a villa, structures that seem out of place in a sleepy village. The decorations are cryptic. Magdalene weeping at the foot of the cross, a devil crouching beneath holy water, inscriptions carved in Latin that seem more like riddles than prayers. Villagers whisper, "Where did the money come from? What did he find?" His silence only deepens the mystery. Pause here. Imagine yourself entering that church today. The air is cool, the scent of old stone sharp in your nose. You see Magdalene carved in plaster, her face streaked with tears. You see symbols that don't quite fit, as though someone was leaving clues rather than decoration. You feel the weight of secrecy pressing down. Many believe Saunière uncovered evidence of Christ's bloodline, documents that proved Magdalene arrived in France with heirs, that noble families absorbed their descendants, that the story of the Grail was never about a cup but about a womb. Perhaps Saunière was paid to keep silent. Perhaps he was bribed to preserve what he found without ever revealing it. Rennes-le-Château sits in the heart of Cathar country, in the very landscape where Magdalene's legend endures. The caves, the chapels, the ruins all whisper of her exile. If the daughters survived anywhere, it would be here, hidden in valleys, preserved in stone. And so the mystery persists. Tourists and seekers still flock to Rennes-le-Château, walking its narrow streets, staring at its church, decoding its symbols. They ask, what did Saunière find? Was it proof of treasure or proof of blood? Pause again. Picture the priest himself, sitting at a desk late at night, lamplight flickering on his face. His hand rests on a folded parchment, its wax seal cracked. He knows what it says. He knows why it must remain secret. He sighs, tucks it away, and never speaks. Rennes-le-Château remains a riddle, a knot of history where treasure, bloodline, and silence intertwine. Perhaps Saunière uncovered a secret carried out of Montségur centuries before, hidden again in his parish. Perhaps he touched upon the final thread of Magdalene's daughters. Whatever he found, it was enough to change his life and to deepen the mystery for everyone who came after. Rennes-le-Château is a place where history blurs into legend, where silence feels thicker than stone. If Magdalene's daughters survived, if their bloodline endured, perhaps it still lingers here in the soil, in the chapels, in the descendants who walk unknowing through its streets. The story we have followed wins through centuries, through exile and fire, through silence and stone, through vaults and whispers. At every turn the daughters of Christ hover just beyond reach, erased from records yet never fully gone. And now, as we reach the end, the pace slows. The fire has burned out. The torches are extinguished. Only memory lingers, fragile and persistent. Imagine twilight in Provence. The sun dips low, staining the sky violet and gold. Lavender fields sway in the evening breeze, their scent rising soft and sweet. Cicadas quiet, their song fading into the hush of night. You sit on a worn stone wall, the air still warm, the silence deep. Somewhere nearby, a chapel bell tolls once, then falls silent. In this moment, history feels close, as if the whispers of 2,000 years still drift on the air. Perhaps Magdalene did walk these hills. Perhaps she carried daughters across the sea, their lives hidden but enduring. Perhaps their blood flowed into noble houses, into dynasties, into families that survive even now. Or perhaps it is only legend, but legend has power. Legend is memory refusing to die. The Vatican's silence, the Cathar's fire, the Templars' downfall all speak to the same fear. Not of myth, but of possibility. For a Christ with heirs is not only divine, it is human. His legacy is not locked in sacraments, but carried in flesh, in blood, in children who laugh and live and pass unnoticed through centuries. Pause here. Imagine yourself walking through a quiet chapel. A black Madonna gazes at you, her child in her arms. The air smells of wax and stone. You kneel, not certain what you believe, but certain of one thing, that history is never whole. That silence always hides something, that absence is often presence in disguise, and perhaps that is the true gift of this story. Not proof, not certainty, but mystery. The daughters of Christ, if they lived, remind us that history is more fragile than we think, more human, more easily erased. But they also remind us of resilience, that even when fire consumes, even when silence smothers, something endures, a thread that cannot be cut. So let us end where we began with a question. Not did Christ have daughters, but what does it mean that people believed he might? It means faith is not only dogma, but imagination. It means memory cannot be fully controlled. It means the story of Magdalene still speaks, not because we can prove it, but because we still listen. The night deepens. Lavender gives way to the damp scent of earth. You hear the faint flutter of bats overhead, the rustle of leaves in the wind. In the distance a storm rumbles, but here, for now, there is only quiet. History fades like smoke after fire, like ink smudged by time, like wet parchment drying in the dark. And yet some threads endure. The hidden daughters of Christ may be lost to chronicles, but they live in the silence, in the gaps, in the whispers we cannot forget. And so, as you close your eyes, remember, sometimes the most dangerous truths are not the ones spoken aloud, but the ones carried in silence, waiting for those who dare to hear them.